Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to tune in before I get started. This should not be a long hangout. I just want to get on here and share my thoughts as usual. And I may do a follow-up hangout that's going to talk about a completely different subject right after this one. But I'll take a poll to see how many people are down for it. And based on your reaction, I may do a follow-up hangout. Yeah, so I see I have a couple of people in here, so I don't want to waste people's time. I'm going to get started with this video. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. If you can just bear with me for a second. Okay, so I've been on Facebook, and I came across a lot of articles about Don Lemon, you know, and some statements that he made on CNN where he basically said that white men are the biggest terror threat in this country. So what I'm going to do is read a few excerpts from this Washington Post article. I will post this article in the description box so that you all can read it for yourself. But in this particular segment, they were talking about these incidents of white terrorism against people of color and against Jews. And during this discussion, Don Lemon said this. He said, "I keep trying to point out to people not to demonize any one group or any one ethnicity. But we keep thinking that the biggest terror threat is something else. Some people who are marching towards the border like it's imminent." Then he goes on to talk about, that issue. He says the last time they did this, a couple of hundred people came, and most of them did not get into the country. Most of them got tuckered out before they even made it to the border. And then he went on to say this. He says, "So we have to stop demonizing people and realize that the biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized by the right, and we have to start doing something about them. There is no travel ban on them. There is no ban, like they had the Muslim ban." And he said, "There is no white guy ban. So what do we do about that?" So he made that comment, and in response, you had a lot of people basically attacking him on Twitter and elsewhere in social media. Where people are calling him a bigot, they're calling him a racist for making this statement. They're going and on and on. You have a lot of these people that are on the right who are basically attacking Don Lemon for this statement. And as this article points out, Don Lemon is actually correct when he says that white men are the biggest terrorist threat in this country. Because this article from the Washington Post cites a report from 2017 that found that there were 115 incidents involving right-wing extremists. And it talks about how there were more deadly than incidents carried out by other groups of people. Also, it talks about how research has shown that there have been almost twice as many terrorist incidents carried out on U.S. soil by right-wing extremists, most of whom are white, than by Islamist extremists. And then they cite another study by the New American Foundation that found similar conclusions, in fact. So I'm going to try to click on some of these links right here to go a little bit further into the story before I get into my commentary. So again, this cites, this is the link to a study that points out how far-right plots and attacks outnumber Islamist incidents by almost 2 to 1. And it goes into more detail. So if you read this article, you could look up these reports and studies on your own. This is another article linking this to a report that talks about a report. It says far-right extremists have launched far more terrorist plots than anyone else in recent years. So you have all these efforts to demonize Muslims and people from the Middle East, when a lot of these terrorist attacks and plots are carried out here in America by Americans, many of whom are white men. So these numbers speak for themselves. They speak to the fact that white men are the biggest terrorist threat in this country. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, but also I want to go into like some of these other comments that people left about Don Lemon, like in response to what he said. So you had these people coming out the woodwork condemning him. So they're saying like, raising different points about him, like saying he's a racist. As you see here, someone has described him as a racist. And, they're calling him an idiot, a hypocrite. They talk about how Don Lemon is radicalizing people with his comments. So they're really going in on Don Lemon for simply stating actual facts. It's an actual fact that white men are the biggest terrorist threat in this country. And that's just dealing with those white supremacist organizations and those far-right people. But when you take into account other factors, which I plan to discuss, it's even a bigger problem than like many people will realize. So these people are just calling him dumb. They're really going in on him. So let me go back to the article. Again, I'll post a link to this article from the Washington Post in the description box, and also we'll try to link some of the other stories as soon as I get a chance. So let me stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to go into more of my commentary on this issue. But before I do that, I want to check in with the people in the chat room. Shout out to James Hall. Shout out to Norman Edwards. Shout out to DJ Wiz. So James Hall says Lemon is absolutely correct. They'll hate him even more for saying it. The face of terror in America is that of the white man. Absolutely. Shout out to Mr. Black Culture. Shout out to Christina Edwards. DJ Wiz said the crazy part is that most black crime stays within black communities, but white terrorism can strike black churches, synagogues, schools, and basically anywhere. Exactly. And we've seen examples of this. We saw that man by the name of Gregory Allen Bush, who went to a Kroger grocery store and killed 2 African Americans. One man he shot in the back of the head, and then he proceeded to shoot that brother as he was laying on the ground dying. Shot him to death in front of his grandson. And then this man proceeded to go outside of that Kroger grocery store and shoot and kill a black woman in the parking lot. And before this man did that, he actually went to a black church and he tried to carry out a massacre at that black church, and he was turned around because the doors was locked and he couldn't get access to the church. So the situation could have been much worse. Then you had another white supremacist by the name of Robert Bowers, who actually went into a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and proceeded to kill 11 people. You had another man, Caesar Sayak, and I know there's some question about his ethnicity, and I'm not really sure of his ethnicity. He looks white to me, but this man sent bombs to Democrats, and many of those targets were black. He targeted the Obamas. He targeted Maxine Waters. He targeted Eric Holder. And he targeted some Democrats, including Bill Clinton, George Soros, and some other people, Robert De Niro. And this is one of these Trump supporters. As I pointed out in my prior video, I said that more likely than not, the suspect was probably a Trump supporter. It turns out that I was correct. His van had all kinds of pro-Trump stickers all over it and anti-Democrat paraphernalia and, propaganda. He put this information not only on his van, but on his social media. It was full of this kind of stuff. Now, this man that shot up the synagogue, I want to go back to him for a second. Not only was he an anti-Semite, this man was a racist against black people. He had several postings on social media referring to black people as the N-word, making all kinds of racist statements about black people. And then you have the situation involving this guy by the name of Benjamin Thomas McDowell. This man tried to carry out like a Dylann Roof style shooting, and he was stopped before he could even launch his plan and engage in his plan and all that kind of stuff. And then you have Dylann Roof, the man who went into a black church and killed 9 innocent black people while they were praying. These black people allowed him amongst them. Like he was like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He went into that black church, and while they welcomed him and while they were praying, this man proceeded to kill them, proceeded to shoot and kill 9 people. And then we have examples of other terrorist attacks committed by these white nationalists, white racists, white supremacists. One of the biggest examples is Tim McVeigh. That man blew up a federal building, killing hundreds of people. These are the real terrorists in this country. These are the people that pose a greater threat, as I pointed out in those studies that point out how, these white supremacist groups are responsible for more than twice the number of terrorist attacks as the people who have been labeled as terrorists. So, and this whole thing is not anything new. This terrorism at the hands of white people, this is not some recent phenomenon. I mean, white people, white men in particular, have always been the biggest terrorist threat in this country. The first act of terrorism, one of the first acts of terrorism that these people committed was when they committed genocide against the native people here in America, killing off entire tribes of people, basically destroying the native peoples in this country, with guns, with biological warfare, by spreading diseases, by literally massacring tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people. That's how they acquired this country, this land that we call America, through violence, through murder, through genocide, and through thievery. That's how they acquired this. And not only did they, exterminate the native people in this country, they kidnapped our ancestors and brought them here in shackles, brought them here as property, and enslaved them for hundreds of years. And during that trip called the Middle Passage, thousands upon thousands of Africans died during that trip. So without a doubt, this white man is the biggest terrorist threat in this country for the longest time. And, often people want to just point the finger at just the white supremacists, the people who are blatantly white supremacists and all that kind of stuff. The people that wear the robes, the people that wear the swastikas, the people that do the Nazi salute. They want to conveniently point their finger just at them while ignoring the terrorism that our people face at the hands of the police as well. Many of these police officers are white men, killing our Black people with impunity too often, with live on camera too often, and there is no justice even in those situations. Like here we are, years after that brother, Eric Garner, was choked to death live on camera, and there is no justice for that brother and his family. No one's been charged with anything after that. Choked to death live on camera, and there is no justice. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. When our people witness that type of brutality against Black people and there is no justice, how else can you describe that other than an act of terrorism? When we look at what happened to Michael Brown when he was killed in Ferguson, shot to death, and his body just was laying in the street for hours upon hours. No one was charged with that crime. That police officer basically got away with murder as that brother's body was laying in the street, for hours on display for the whole community. Much like how they put Black bodies on display during the Jim Crow era when they would lynch Black people to send a message. So it's not just the white supremacists, the open white supremacists, the people that are proudly white supremacists. It's also these down low white supremacists who walk around not in Klansman robes, but in blue uniforms with badges on. Those are the types of terrorists that we also need to be on alert of. And that brings me to not only did you have history of, the enslavement of Black people, the genocide against Native people, you also had a legacy of Jim Crow. And I talked about Black people who were lynched, for many years following emancipation. Black people were lynched and there was no justice. We all know about Emmett Till, how they ran up in Emmett Till's house and, dragged that brother out and beat that brother beyond recognition to the point that his body was rendered horrific. It was grotesque, the extent to which they brutalized that brother. And we see all these images of Black people being lynched during that Jim Crow era. And there was no justice for the Black man or woman during those times. They could lynch you, and then not only would they lynch you, they would take photographs of the lynching. They would proudly celebrate the lynching like it was a sporting event. But yet these people have some nerve and some audacity to question a Black man calling them out for their terrorism against Black people and other groups of people. You have pictures of these people smiling and celebrating the death of our ancestors and our elders, while Black bodies were swinging from trees with nooses around their neck. You have people gathered around smiling as if it's some happy event. They even have their children present at these grotesque displays of barbarism. And these people had a nerve to be mad at Don Lemon for calling them what they are, terrorists. Yeah, you see pictures of bodies burned. People burned alive. That's what they would do to Black people back then. Black people castrated. That's the terrorism that these people are responsible responsible for. You know, simply for a black man trying to vote, you know, trying to get the right to vote, black people were lynched. Simply for trying to sit at some lunch counter, black people were beaten and humiliated. Simply for trying to ride on a bus and sit where they want to on a bus, black people were not only jailed by the police, you had terrorist groups actually bomb buses and terrorize black people. These men, the white men, are the biggest terrorists in this country, not only today, but throughout American history. You know, while these people professed to be all about liberty and all that kind of stuff, they terrorized black people. They brutalized black people. They lynched black people, castrated black people, killed black people. And again, this terrorism is not just some terrorism isolated to some white supremacist groups. Often the biggest terrorists are our own government. It was our government, this government, that had a counterintelligence program that killed black leaders, killed Malcolm X, killed Martin Luther King, killed Fred Hampton, killed many other leaders in the Black Panther Party and other organizations, locked them up on trumped up charges. That is terrorism. That's what terrorism looks like. And the people that were running those government institutions that terrorized our people and that actually carried out these plans, they were white men. So to say that these people are terrorists is just to state an actual fact based on history and based on current day conditions and actual statistics and facts. So you can't attack this man for speaking the truth. You just can't. Now, one thing that I have to talk about, and I've mentioned this before with these recent incidents of white terrorism, you know, white supremacist terrorism, it's the fact that you have a president who has basically de-emphasized the need for the government to investigate these types of white extremist organizations, these white nationalist groups, these white supremacist groups. This man is taking funds away from investigating those types of groups and focusing solely on Middle Eastern type of groups or so-called Islamist terrorists and stuff like that, even though the stats point out that white supremacists are the biggest threat in this country. You have a president that is taking money away from funding investigations of those types of groups, of white supremacist organizations. And this is no surprise because this is a man, after all, who panders to white supremacists, who caters to these people, you know, who tries to win over these people by speaking their language, by carrying on, you know, subliminal messages to voice his support for them, by giving them green lights when he said that there was some fine people that participated in that hate rally in Charlottesville, that violent rally in Charlottesville where a woman was killed and many other people were injured, where black people were beaten, where you had a white supremacist actually fire a gun into a crowd of people. Those people were protesting to defend the symbols of slavery and the oppression of black people, defending Confederate imagery and symbols. That's why they started that white supremacist hate rally. But yet in Donald Trump's mind, there are some fine people. So it's no surprise that Donald Trump would not investigate these groups. Now, another thing that I want to talk about before I get to your comments, I'm going to make a few more comments and then I'll get to your comments real soon. Another thing that I have to talk about is something that Don Lemon brought up. And he was talking about like how you have certain groups of people that are stigmatized or discriminated against. Like he talked about how you had a Muslim ban and you have this discriminatory treatment towards immigrants, you know, all this racist rhetoric that you hear from these people. And sadly, some of our own ignorant people parrot this white supremacist hate talk because they're they're lost. They don't have correct information. But while these other groups are demonized as a collective, when it comes to white men, in this society, they have certain privileges, what has been referred to as white privilege. So white men are not judged as a collective. They are judged as individuals. All those people that I mentioned at the beginning, Gregory Bush, Robert Bowers, Caesar Sayak, Benjamin Thomas McDowell, Dylan Roof, all these people are just judged as individuals. They're treated as individuals. They are not collectively judged. They don't, the society doesn't respond to those types of violent actions by, discriminating against all white men, because the society is run by white men. So they judge white men as individuals. But when it comes to black people are judged as a collective. For instance, the crime in Chicago or inner city violence, acts of, people engaging in drug transactions and all that kind of stuff. They use those types of negative stories to demonize an entire group of people, to criminalize an entire race of people, to make it seem as if all black men are engaged in drug dealing and thuggery and gangster lifestyles and stuff like that. That's what they do. And because of those types of stereotypes, they want to stop and harass black men, brutalize black men, and these incidents of police brutality that we hear all of the time. So black men are judged and condemned as a collective based on the actions of a few. But when it comes to white men, the actions of the few are just judged as individual incidents. The same is true for how they treat Arabs and Muslims. Because you have some Arabs or Muslims who engage in terrorism, they label and judge all Muslims and all Arabs as terrorists. That's why you have a travel ban in this country. That's why you have Donald Trump openly spewing anti-Muslim rhetoric. So, you have all these examples of other groups of people being judged as a collective, but when it comes to this white man, he has special privileges and special rights, and he's not judged as a group. When you look at immigrants in this country, Donald Trump launched his campaign by voicing hatred toward Mexican immigrants. He talked about how they were rapists and criminals and all that kind of stuff. Again, another example of people judging an entire group of people based on the actions of the few, assuming that most immigrants are criminals. And let me correct that, most immigrants of color, most immigrants from Latin America, they assume that most of them are criminals, are deadbeats, are a drain on society, etc. But again, when it comes to white people, they are judged, white men in particular, they are judged as individuals. They're given the benefit of the doubt. Donald Trump went on to talk about these Mexicans and other immigrants. He described them as, rapists and criminals. And he said, and there are some good immigrants among them, basically suggesting that most of them are criminals and, no good to American society. But here you have a case of a group of men, white men, who are the biggest threat, according to the numbers, when it comes to terrorism. And, when you factor in police brutality and when you factor in these mass killings that take place, most of these mass shooters are white men, but nobody wants to touch that. When these schools are shot up, like that school that was shot up in Connecticut, like that, that movie theater that was shot up, that shooting that took place in Las Vegas, and so many other examples. Often, most of the time, the perpetrator is a white man, but nobody wants to talk about how this white man is the biggest terrorist threat in the United States. They want to avoid that. And they want to condemn that brother, Don Lemon, for speaking on that, for actually stating facts. And while all these people call him a racist, the facts are not racist, man. The facts speak for themselves. You know, and these same people that want to attack Don Lemon as a racist, as a bigot, as being prejudiced, these are the same people that promote stereotypes about Black people, about Latinos, about Muslims, and other groups of people. They have no problem making generalizations about others, but when it comes to themselves, somebody makes a generalization, all of a sudden they want to attack that person and label them as racist when, you know, in the big scheme of things, they're not racist, they're just stating facts. And, you know, I'm talking about people like a Don Lemon. It's just a fact that white people are responsible for more terrorism in this country than other groups of people. And the last thing I want to close on is this point before I go to your comments. Is this, like, while Don Lemon is talking about the white man as the biggest terrorist threat, just bear with me a second. While Don Lemon is talking about the white man being the biggest terrorist threat, he's in a relationship with a white man. I mean, as you can see in this article right here, he's kissing a white man. So, I mean, if you really believe that this white man is the biggest terrorist threat, you know, in the country, why are you with the white man? But that's a whole nother subject for a whole nother video. So I just had to touch on that before I close out. So let me get to your comments real quick. It just reminds me, like, you'll have these people that'll be talking all this militant Black stuff. And after they're finished talking all this militant Black power stuff and get off the stage, they get, you know, go home to their white lover. You know, you will have a militant Black woman with the afro, with the dashiki on, fists in the air. But as soon as her Black power performance is over with, the first thing she's going to do is lay down with her white man. And the same is true for some of these brothers, man. They had the locks in their hair. They got the dashiki. They got the African names and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they go home to their white woman. It's just a shame, man. But I had to mention that before I go. But, you know, despite that, you know, it is a good thing that Don Lemon did speak the truth. It's just a shame that it's hard for people to take you seriously when you're in that type of situation where you're talking about the white man is the biggest terrorist, but yet you're laying up with the white man. Man, man, all I can do is shake my head. But anyway, let me just get back to these. Let me close some of these windows. Hopefully you all can see me clearly and stuff. And there's no problem with the sound. All right, so hopefully people can hear me okay. I see that it looks like it's buffering when I look at the chat and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully everything's okay. If you could throw up a 1 just to let me know that everything's all right, I would appreciate it. And then I'll get to your actual comments. So somebody can let me know by throwing up the 1 to let me know that you can hear me okay. I would appreciate it. Okay, great. Randy threw up the 1. All right, so let's see what people are saying. Yeah, so Political Princess said that Don Lemon is correct. Great topic. One thing about whites is that they never own up to their own crap. Exactly. And Norman Edwards said Trump is the grand dragon, racist in the White House. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, man, I would say he's a white supremacist. All the signs are there. You know, this man openly panders to these white supremacists. The other day, he was calling himself a nationalist. So it's absolutely ridiculous. So let me show this comment from Black Power. Um, just bear with me a second. So Black Power said Don Lemon has the white man's D in his mouth every night. So should we take him serious? Yeah, I kind of touched on that. I mean, I touched on that point in the last comment that I made in this video. Yeah, it's hard to really take somebody seriously under those circumstances, even though like the facts are right. Like he's right on in terms of the facts, but it's hard to take him as an individual seriously under the circumstances that I discussed toward the end of this. So let me see what other people are saying. James Hall said, let them rage. The right was busy trying to deflect from the synagogue killings by trying to blame others. Exactly. It's like they were blaming, they were more upset with, you know, the media than they were with this guy that shot up that synagogue. And, and then you have some black people that I'll talk about real quick that want to, brush aside that horrific crime and say, well, it's just Jews, it's not black people. That man hated black people just as much as he hated black people just as much as he hated Jews. And it could have been a black church that he shot up. And I just find it odd that you have people that expect people to have compassion for black people, but yet they have no compassion for other groups of people. But that's a whole nother subject. But yeah, they were trying to deflect. They were trying to basically say, well, it's the media's fault, even though this racist, this white supremacist was parroting all the rhetoric that he heard from Fox News, all the rhetoric that he heard from Donald Trump and these other right-wing Republicans. He was parroting their rhetoric, but now they're trying to disown him. All right, so just bear with me a second. This chat automatically hides certain comments, so certain comments don't show up, so I have to show the comments. Yeah, somebody said, Political Princess said, anybody with me? Sometimes we as blacks, we need a racist Trump to wake our black asses up. I disagree with that, man. I don't think, by saying stuff like that, you're basically making it seem like what Donald Trump is doing is a good thing in an indirect kind of way. There's nothing good about what Donald Trump is doing. And, we don't need somebody like him to motivate us to get involved and get engaged and try to change the society in which we live. So Better One said that she saw, or he saw that Sayak is part Italian and part Puerto Rican. I keep hearing different things. Like you hear some people saying he's, I heard somebody say he was Filipino or whatever. The fact, assuming that what you're saying is true, that could still mean a white man. I mean, Italian is white, that's a white country, a European country, and many Puerto Ricans are white. A lot of them are of mixed heritage and all that kind of stuff, mixed racial background and stuff like that. But that man is an honorary white person. Yeah, and I hear, James Hall says that he was Filipino. Yeah, so it's kind of mixed, but he identified as a white man. He acted like a white man, just like George Zimmerman. You know, even though people are saying that he's a Hispanic and this and that, to try to you know, avoid charges of white racism and all that kind of stuff. They try to disown him, say he's a white, you know, a Hispanic and this and that. But a lot of these people, like these mixed backgrounds, they could be just as racist as your average racist white man. So that's no pass for them. You know, the fact that they may have some minority background in their heritage. The fact of the matter is, a lot of these people are, if now they're not white, you know, like in the case of George Zimmerman, you could say, well, he was a white Hispanic or whatever. Even in the case where they're not white, they have the mentality of a white person and they identify as white for the most part. Now, sister said, is it true that he was married to a black woman, and talking about the Kroger store shooter? Now, I've heard that. I mean, it's kind of implied by some of the things that came out in the story. Like, you know, I haven't seen a photograph of her yet, but according to the articles that I read, he called his ex-wife the N-word on several occasions. And I looked on his Facebook page, and he has a son who appears to be biracial. He doesn't look like he's white. So I wouldn't doubt that he actually had a black ex-wife. Yeah, and DJ Wiz made a good point. He said every president that was ever assassinated in this country was killed by the hands of a white man. And that's an example of terrorism. I mean, when you look at, you know, John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, and then you look at the attempted assassinations. Yeah, I mean, there are other examples of white men doing this. And then I see I have a troll in here. This is not a safe place for trolls. You know, I don't care about your opinions. You know, I'm not here to debate with white supremacists and bigots. So I'm just going to block that particular person, and I'm not going to even mention their name. Yeah, and that reminds me, that's a point that I forgot to raise, Christina. They're not only the biggest terrorists in the United States, they're the biggest terrorists in the world. When you look at all the violence that has been committed at the hands of this white man, you have to say that they're the biggest terrorists in the world. When you look at imperialism and colonialism, them raping continents of their resources, their human and natural resources. When you look at all the violence that they are responsible for, all the killings that they are responsible for around the world, you have to say that they are, in fact, the biggest terrorists. When you look at all the wars that these people are responsible for, all you have to do is look at, for instance, World War II, when they dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan, killing over 100,000 people, you know, raping the continent of Africa of all of its resources. All you have to look at is the King of Belgium and how he dealt with black people in the Congo, you know, dismembering people, you know, cutting people's limbs off and, you know, committing all kinds of acts of barbarism, killing, you know, many thousands of black people. Just looking at that alone, you can say that this white man is the biggest terrorist on the face of the earth. It was the white man that was responsible for genocide against his fellow white man, the Jews in Germany, killing 6 million of them. You know, dumping their bodies in mass graves. It was the white man that went back in the United States. It was white men that killed each other during that Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of people killed in that Civil War. So their violence goes beyond like other groups. It goes towards each other, you know, towards white men themselves. So these people are responsible for a lot of violence around this world, more violence than other groups of people are. So that's a very valid point. You look at all the wars that these people are responsible for. I mean, all you got to do is look, not even that far ago, look to the war in Iraq. You know, this country invaded a whole sovereign nation under the false pretense that there were weapons of mass destruction and that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. Killing all those thousands of people, invading the country, plundering it of its resources. This is what these people do. And, you know, just before somebody gets everything twisted, I'm not saying that every single white man is a terrorist or every single white person is a terrorist and evil, or etc. I'm talking about as a collective, you know, just as a fact, you know, that white men are responsible for more terrorism than other groups of people. And it's just a fact. Yeah, so Brock said that Young Turks even said it's a fact about white men. Shout out to Hollow Point. He says that our culture has aided in the dehumanizing of our people. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to deny that, you know, that somehow we contributed to that, but that's a whole nother subject. You know, the subject is the terrorism committed by this white man. So let's continue on. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, and that's a valid point. Like a lot of people are saying, well, it's, you know, because Hollow Point was making the point to say that we participate in our own dehumanization through music and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, even if you look at that, I mean, we were dehumanized before then, as people were pointing out, before there was rap music. You know, well before that, they had the minstrel shows attacking Black people by stereotyping us and dehumanizing us, well before you had hip hop music. And even when you look at hip hop music, I mean, who owns these record labels? Who promotes the music on the radio stations? Who decides what music gets played on these radio stations? Who uses their connections to market certain music and decide which artists get signed to which labels? I mean, you got to factor all that in as you try to just point the finger at the role that Black people play in their own dehumanization and degradation. Yeah, so I think that's enough on that particular point. So let's see. Yeah, so James Hall said that guy that shot the people at Kroger, you know, called his wife, you know, the N word, you know, called her a nigger bitch, according to court documents, and you know, made statements like that. So apparently, he probably was married to a Black woman. All right, so let's. Yeah, so Ross said there was an article published today saying that white men are the biggest terrorist threat. Yeah, and I just cited the article at the beginning. I don't know how soon, if you just joined in or not, but I cited a Washington Post article that cites some reports that confirm that actual fact. All right, so yeah, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. You know, I appreciate the support. And I was thinking about doing a live stream about the interviews that I saw on Jada Pinkett's show. She has a show on Facebook called The Red Table or something like that. And for the last couple of episodes, she interviewed her husband, Will Smith, and they were talking about their relationship. So I've been thinking about doing a live stream on that subject, you know, just sharing my thoughts, you know, because I think that they had a very intelligent discussion about relationships, and I'm really interested in what you all think about that. So before I go, I just want to know if that would be something that you all would be interested in hearing about. So if y'all could just let me know yes or no, I would appreciate it. Yeah, my lady sent me, you know, the video of that discussion. So I was like, yeah, you know, I checked it out. You know, I checked out part 1 and part 2, and it was a real interesting discussion about relationships. So I would want to know, like, what do y'all think? Is that something y'all would be interested in talking about? I know a lot of times I just talk about like serious subjects on here, but every now and then I like to lighten it up and talk about relationships. Um, I'm not like, you know, some relationship guru by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought that it was an interesting discussion that, you know, that I may talk about. I may actually go live tonight and talk about it. But before I do so, I want to hear from y'all. Is that something y'all would be interested in seeing a live stream on? So I'm going to wait a couple of minutes for people to chime in on that question. We have quite a few people watching right now. So if you all can let me know if that's something you would be interested in, please, you know, voice your opinion in the chat room right now. I see that Ross said that they'll be interested in it, you know, that he'll be interested in checking out that discussion. So I want to hear from a few more people before I sign out. Like, what do y'all think? Is that something you're interested in? Do you want to hear me talk about relationships more often? So I'm really interested in that you know, your answer to that particular question. So I'll wait around a couple of more seconds for people to chime in. Do you all want me to talk about Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith's interview on the Red Table, where they were talking about their relationship and offering relationship advice? All right, so I see that I guess people are ready to respond to that question. So I'll think about it. I'll give it some thought, and I'll get back to you all. So I see a couple of people said sure. So I may do that. I may get back on here later on tonight and just share my thoughts about that interview. So with that, I'm going to say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. Like my video, share my video. For those of you who are watching this recorded, leave your comments. I'm really interested in what you think about this whole question of whether or not white men are the biggest terrorists in the U.S. And also hit that bell so that you will know right away when I post content on here. Because I think a lot of people just aren't aware of when I post content. So yeah, so I want y'all to be aware of that by hitting that bell, liking the video, sharing the video so that more people will find out about this channel. And I want to thank you all for your support, for watching my videos, for subscribing to my videos. And I want you to spread the word because I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So with that, I'm going to say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. I may be back up on here later on tonight. So hit that notification bell so you will know. Peace.